Hi, this is David from the Solid Rock Church in Drogheda, Ireland. Thanks for tuning in. We really hope this conversation inspires you. Let's get stuck in, and as always, get in touch with any comments or questions via our socials or our website, solidrock.ie. So I'm sitting down with Andre this week, and the topic that we're going to be sharing with our church on Sunday is about fear. I love this topic, Andre. It's going to be challenging to bring it in on time because I have a feeling I'm going to keep you talking for hours. It's one of those great topics. Tell me more. What was it that inspired your heart for talking about this and sharing this?
It's actually a great topic. I have noticed when speaking with the Christians, whether here in Ireland or elsewhere, many feel cornered and intimidated. Many are becoming more and more uncomfortable, with the setting that we're living now. So using the scriptures, I wanted to encourage us on how to tackle what, in my opinion, has become an issue. And the story of Nehemiah is a good example.
A lot of people you talk to will agree that the world is different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
We live in a different reality.
Yeah.
And I love that the Bible is full of prescriptive text to help us with fear. That we're not called to be fearful Christians. But let's dive into the story. What do you want to extract from it?
Yeah, so the story is found in the book of Nehemiah. So if you read the chapter 1, chapter 2, and I would say chapter 4, that I will be sharing. The story takes place where after the kingdom of Judah actually was taken into captivity to Babylon. So Nehemiah was a cupbearer of the king of Persia. So one day received some brothers from come to bring him the news that the wall of Jerusalem was just was destroyed. And the reaction of Nehemiah was like, he just cry out to the Lord and pray that, they will return to their land. And so if you keep going, you will see that God touched the heart of the king, and the king gave him permission, to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the wall. But as soon as they arrived there, the enemy of Judah, also enemy of God, I will say, started to mock them. You can see the intimidation, the bullying, but that didn't stop Nehemiah, and many of Israelites started to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and some of the enemy, began. They came back again, start to mock them, to intimidate them again and again. And it was getting even worse because they were planning to attack and kill them. That's how bad it was.
And I think those things are maybe not to the point of attack and killing, but this idea of mocking someone's behavior, that's stuff that people deal with day in, day out today.
You can imagine the fear, most people will just go, okay, I can't take it anymore, so I just let go and then I go do something. But they keep going, they keep building the wall, and that didn't stop them. Also, what I like about this story, Nehemiah pray to God, and also in the meantime, also they prepare themselves for a possible fight. But they continue to build the wall. So the intimidation was there, but they make the decision to continue to build the wall because that's what God had put in Nehemiah's heart to do. But at the same time, they was like, okay, let's get ready just in case it gets worse so we can just fight back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there was no plan B if things get bad to a certain point, as in they weren't going to change what God had put on their heart to do, or what they were purposed to do.
What encouraged me very deeply, I would say, is when God puts something in your heart, the enemy will come, try to bully, to intimidate you. Now, you need to identify when the enemy start acting like that and be obedient to God. That's very hard sometimes,
And
It's
what
not
I'm
easy.
picking up on from what you're saying, Andre, is that it's not always external. It's not always a person who will come and intimidate you. It can be just an inner voice in our own hearts that says you're not good enough, you can't do it, you should retreat. Puts fear into our hearts by all the negative voices that we listen to ourselves. And debatable, and maybe that's for another conversation, is that the enemy, or is that our own flesh and self and insecurity? Maybe it can be either, but in either case, that's just as real as an external attack.
Yeah, exactly. It can be that for sure. And also, usually we have tendency to think about, when we are intimidated, we think about the person who's doing that. But as a Christian, we need to be careful, not to look at the person who's doing that, but to look at the spirit beyond that. Because if you start attacking the person, that's wrong. We don't need to attack the person. So when you, the first thing is to identify the spirit beyond that. And first thing to do, as we just read from Nehemiah, go to God, cry out to God, pray to God. And sometimes the enemy will use a people, and sometimes they can use just a system. It can be rules put in place or laws. That can happen as well.
That's such a nugget of wisdom right there. It's like sometimes when we respond with a kind of knee-jerk reaction, or we go in to just attack when we're being attacked, then we lack that wisdom that can come from God. And this idea of pausing, taking it back to your Father, having conversation and dialogue with him, hearing his heart, and then going back and applying godly wisdom into the situation, man, that's a winning recipe.
Absolutely. Because you see, it's easy. We are human. When that's happened, so the first reaction is to fight back. But the scripture is telling us, otherwise. Something that's happened. So we need to learn, first of all, to identify the spirit of intimidation in our lives. We can be aggressed openly, but like we just read the story of Nehemiah, what we need to do first is, when that happens, just pause for a minute. Pause. It doesn't matter how big the intimidation is. Just stop for a minute and then cry out to God. So that means you start by prayer. And God will guide you, will give you the courage, or will bring the answer. God can move the person, or can move what was put in place, but He's the one going to do it. Because as a human, you don't fight spirit with human weapons, you see. So that's why we need to go first to God, cry out to God, present the situation before Him. He's the one who's going to take care of the situations.
And I think that speaks really beautifully into heart motivation as well. Because then when we're in a situation where we're pushing forward, if we're attacked and then out of fear we're motivated to protect our zone versus being motivated by what God is speaking to us, I think there's huge difference in our heart motivation and why we do things that we do. Mm-hmm. Like I often I'm reminded when people are like, they're in a fight with somebody over something, and then they walk away going, I'm going to show them, I'm going to prove them. And so their motivation for doing what they're doing in life is to prove others who didn't believe in them that they're better than they thought.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's such an unhealthy heart motivation to do anything in life. And what we're talking about here is you bring it to God, and then you make sure that your motivator is not insecurity or fear or things like that, but you're moving forward with confidence, and your heart posture and your motivation towards God and others is in a healthy place.
Absolutely. So this is where prayer is so important. So you see, God knows when we are pressured to do something that is against Him, and He has immediate help readily available for us. But we need to ask. You have to ask first. You have to make this first step. Go to him. Even, it can be just a simple thing. Just cry out to God. God help me. As simple. God help me. I don't know how to act. I don't know how to to behave. Just help me. I need your help. And he will either provide supernatural courage or a way out, because he's God. But we need to make sure that we start by prayer, cry out to him, and then ask him for help. But make sure that we don't give in to the intimidation because of fear.
I love it. I love it. This is so good. This is so relevant to all of our journeys in life. It's like reminding ourselves that God is for us and that he has a way out for us, that we're not going to hit a dead end where God turns around and goes, well, I don't know, you're on your own. Like, every path that we travel with God, he's got that way forward for us.
Yes.
That's so encouraging.
Yeah, it's that I think it's especially the society we're living now, as you just said at the beginning, is completely different. If you look back 10 years back or 20 years back, it's completely different. So as a Christian, we need to be aware, to adapt, and to know how to react. And always remember that we are different. We are the light. We have the answer. So if we start acting the same way as the people who try to bully us, so we become as them, the same person, the same people. So we need to show that we are different. If we have any problem, if we are attacked, we don't act the same way they're waiting for us, you see.
And it's interesting because on one hand, you're saying we have the answer. On the other hand, you're talking about if you don't know, bring it back to God. And so I think it's an important piece for people to kind of connect, that it doesn't mean we fluff an answer if we don't have an answer, but you will get an answer if you bring it back to God.
Yes.
And so it's okay to say, leave it with me, I'll come back to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we're not just throwing solutions that are half baked at situations, but we're taking the time, as you said, in prayer, bringing it back to God, and then delivering what we're confident is God's will for that situation through us.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we need to be aware of is we are not fighting people again, but we are fighting the spirit beyond the people. And what the enemy is doing, using people to attack the church, to intimidate us, is trying to break our obedience to God. So that's the goal. So he wants us to obey him instead of to obey God. So that's why it's so important to make sure that we don't look at the person as, the people that we need to fight back, to show them how strong we are, that we can respond to the attack, but to see the spirit beyond and to make sure that it doesn't matter what happened, we keep our obedience to God intact.
Because that's one of the areas where the enemy is going to just try and derail things for us, because he knows that if he does that, then it messes up everything.
Absolutely.
And as you're sharing and speaking, I'm also just reminded of the fact that Jesus was so countercultural. He like what you're talking about now is this idea of doing something that really goes against what like mainstream advice would be. Mainstream advice says the opposite. It says fight your battle, assert yourself in your own strength and show them. And Jesus being so countercultural, and then what you're talking about is the way of Jesus, and it's also so countercultural but so powerful and relevant if it's applied not just in Christian circles but in our lives as a whole, in every situation, in the workplace, in schools, in colleges, in whatever context. Apply this stuff and it actually works. You're not just here sharing something theoretical. This will yield results in your life.
Yes, absolutely. And the enemy knows what he's looking for. He knows when he push this button, the way you're going to react. Now, it's not about showing how clever we are, but is about showing how wise we are. Because if you are wise enough, you will see where the enemy is trying to bring you, and you can avoid that just simply by, just stop, pause, and then don't look at the person. Identify that it's the spirit beyond the person. So you don't respond to the person. You go first to God, and God will bring the answer.
Mm-hmm. And more I find myself simply not responding in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like 90% of the time, the best
It's
way...
not easy, by the way.
It takes restraint, but actually not responding at all is majority of the time a much safer card to play than to respond in the moment. Because usually responding in the moment, you can find yourself short-tempered, you can find yourself angry, and it's worth always taking things away and not responding then and there, and just politely ending the conversation and then taking it to God, as you said. That's going to save a lot of hot-headed people listening to this podcast a lot of stress and turmoil.
Take a walk.
Take a walk.
Yeah. So I think it's very important, to identify, because I'm very convinced that if, as a church, as a Christian, we start acting like that, that will make a big change, in our society, and people will start looking at us differently. Otherwise, there will be no difference, So we need to show that we are different, and how God, is a living God, is real, is the one who can change things, not people, not a system, not a rule, not the laws.
Yeah. Christianity applied. One of my favorite topics at the moment. The idea of applying what we believe, not just believing what we believe. So everything that we've been talking about, Andre, it really is, it's got huge amounts of takeaway. It's got huge amounts of application potential in people's lives if we really take to heart what you're prescribing based on scripture, based on what God is showing you. So if I'm listening to this podcast, or on Sunday our guys are going to be listening to the message, what is the take home bottom line here? What are the things that you can instruct people to do in order to really be successful in applying this in their lives?
Yeah, so the first thing I will say, I will really encourage people to go to read the story of Nehemiah. It's very encouraging, very, very encouraging. And also, as a take-home message, I will say, if the Lord, because another thing I want to add is, usually when the enemy is attacking us, because you want to make sure that if God wants to do something through us, that will not happen, and so that's why if the Lord gives you, let's say, something, put something in your heart, to share or to do, just do it. Obey, be obedient to God. So that's the first thing. Even though the enemy try to distract you, to bring fear, just be obedient to God. Don't allow anyone or any system to intimidate you from fulfilling God's will. And also, if I can say, remember 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." So fear must not stop us. We must move by the power, boldness of God. We also we need to keep in mind that we are not fighting people, but the spirit beyond their action. That is very important. And we need to be able, ask God to help us identify that spirit. And once we manage to identify that spirit, and go to God. Don't let bullying or intimidation stop you from obeying God, because our obedience to God is that for the enemy is an affront. So that's what the enemy's goal is, just to break our obedience to God.
When you said there, Andre, about because you used the word systems, so
Yeah.
use any one, so individual or a person, but then you said or any system for it not to let it bring you away from fulfilling God's will in your life. What do you mean by system?
Yeah. So what I mean by system, so you see, we mentioned people. Most of the time when we see bullying, intimidation is from people around us. But it can be a system. What I mean by system is the system can be put in place through laws or rules on the workplace that you have to obey. Now, it happens most of the time that kind of the laws or rule is against our, what we believe. Now, that can be very challenging because I haven't experienced some of the friends, Christian, lost their job because of the system that was put in place. So that also is a kind of intimidations. So again, it's not the easy one, but we still need to obey God. Everything that goes against what we believe, from people attacking us or from the system, we need just to say no.
And I'm reminded of Daniel in the Old Testament, where he refused to obey the orders of the king, puts himself in a place where his life is on the line. Mm-hmm. And then this fits so well with what we're talking about, where we're not motivated by fear, because at that point he could have really freaked out. He could have really been afraid for his life, and probably rightly so to be afraid for his life.
Yeah.
And he brings that level, he brings that level up to where it's like, well, I'm obeying God by doing this, and I know that God will have my back, and even if he doesn't, I still won't compromise. And then God does have his back.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible story.
Yeah.
And that applies to all of us. That applies to every single follower of Christ when they put themselves in a place where they're not willing to compromise and they are fearless and move forward. Or even if you have fear, don't let the fear dictate and stop you from doing something. Do it in spite of your fear.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do something worthwhile, even if there's fear in the background. Don't let it control your life. And then God has our backs.
Yeah. It's not easy. So I recognize it's not easy. It's very, very challenging because you can find yourself. So you don't know until you face a situation where you have to make a decision. And sometimes the decision will affect not only you, but it can affect your family, your children. But even though, in that kind of the situation, obeying God is still the right thing to do.
That's a really interesting one as well. So if we're motivated by fear, then it's going to lead to not being obedient to the will of God.
Obedient. Yes.
And obedience can't really happen if we're motivated by fear, because God will call us to step out onto the water in some capacity, in some way in our lives, and it's going to be something that can evoke or will definitely evoke fear in the human nature side of us. And so I cannot allow fear to control who I am and step into the will of God for my life. Those two things don't coexist.
That's why, in the Bible, many times God keeps saying, don't be afraid, don't fear,
Take courage.
Take courage, because that go against, our human nature, So obedience and fear, you cannot put the both together. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so demand courage, yeah. And also to be, when you are overwhelmed by fear, don't try to ignore it. Just bring it to God. Don't try to hide it. Bring it to God and then ask for help.
As we wrap up, Andre, the question that I'd love to ask, because I'm sure it's on the hearts and lives of a lot of people listening, when they look at these warrior type characters through a history throughout the Bible, and they study them and they see the great things that they did and the courage that they had, the lack of fear or the ability to push fear into its rightful place for it not to control what they did or didn't do, and execute this life that God had for them in its fullness, which was a bold life. And I think a lot of people, if they're honest with themselves, they find themselves in this place where they just can't feel anywhere close to being able to navigate in that. Like if people are listening to the podcast and they're going, well, I'm so detached from what you're saying. I want to be that person, but I'm crippled with anxiety, or I'm crippled with fear, or I'm crippled with not allowing myself to step out of this zone where I don't need courage, or I don't need, what would you say to them? What are the practical steps for them, for people who feel they can't apply this, that it's too distant for them? Is there any advice?
Yeah, so the advice is still, I will encourage them, to recognize first, and again, to pray to God. Now, another thing is we are the church. That's why we are here. That's why we are brothers and sisters. So if you cannot do it by yourself, talk to one of the brothers. Come to church. Find someone you trust and ask them to pray with you. I think that's the good start. Because when we pray together, we can just build one another. And, so that is the first step. But start by just acknowledge, bring to God, cry out to God, pray, and then find someone in the church you trust and then ask them to pray with you.
And I just love that answer, because it's like, you become the people that you spend time with.
Absolutely.
So if your family is not Christian people, and they're full of fear and they're afraid to step out in case a terrorist attacks them, and they live in constant fear, and you're just in that environment all the time, do you know what? Sometimes that motivation of fear in your life is not just rooted in you, it's rooted in your surroundings. So you need to get yourself out of those surroundings. You need to get yourself into a place like a community of faith, where you're surrounding yourself with people who are already applying faith,
yes,
and not being motivated by fear.
Absolutely.
And that environment, being in community, will change stuff in your life as well. Hey, I really hope you found this sit down helpful. We pray it has an impact on your future and stirs your faith. If you want to know more about who we are as a church, best place to start is via our website, solidrock.ie. If you feel this podcast has helped you in your journey and you want to sow financially into the life of the church, you can do that by going directly to our giving page, solidrock.ie/giving, and in a few simple taps you can give directly to the life of the church. Until next time, stay selfless, love God, and serve others.